the Senate had a hearing this week for AI. Sam Altman was there, as well as Gary Marcus, a professor from NYU. That's an overpriced college in New York City. And Christina Montgomery, the chief privacy and trust officer from IBM, which had Watson before anybody else was in the AI business. And I think they deprecated it or they stopped working on it, which is quite paradoxical. There were a couple of very interesting moments. Sam claimed the U.S. should create a separate agency to oversee AI. I guess he's in the Chamath camp. He wants the agency to issue licenses to train and use AI models. A little regulatory capture there, as we say in the biz. He also claims, and this was interesting, dovetailing with Elon's CNBC interview with, I think, Dave Farber, which was very good, that he owns no equity in OpenAI whatsoever and was, quote, doing it because he loves it. Any thoughts, Chamath? You did say that this would happen 2 months ago, and here we are 2 months later, and exactly what you said would happen is in the process of happening. Regulation, licensing, and regulatory capture.
Sam went a little further than I sketched out a few months ago, which is that he also said that it may make sense for us to issue licenses for these models to even be compiled. And for these models to actually do the learning. And I thought that that was really interesting because what it speaks to is a form of KYC, right? Know your customer. And again, when you look at markets that can be subject to things like fraud and manipulation, right? Where you can have a lot of bad actors, banking is the most obvious one. We use things like KYC to make sure that money flows are happening appropriately and between parties that where the intention is legal. And so I think that that's actually probably the most important new bit of perspective that he is adding as somebody right in the middle of it, which is that you should apply to this agency to get a license to then allow you to compile a model. And I think that that was a really interesting thing. The other thing that I said, and I said this in a tweet just a couple of days ago, is I'm really surprised actually where this is the first time in modern history that I can remember where we've invented something, we being Silicon Valley, and the people in Silicon Valley are the ones that are more circumspect than the folks on Wall Street or other areas. And if you gauge the sentiment, the hedge funds and family offices right now are just giddy about AI. And it turns out if you look at their 13Fs, they're all long NVIDIA and AMD. But if you actually look at the other side of the coin, which is the folks in Silicon Valley that's actually making it, the rest of us are like, hey, let's crawl before we walk, before we run.
Yeah, let's think about guardrails. Let's be thoughtful here. And so the big money people are saying, let's place bets. And the people building it are saying, hey, let's be thoughtful, Sachs.
Which is opposite to what it's always been, I think.
Right. We're like, hey, let's run with this. And Wall Street's like, prove it to me. Sachs, you are a less regulation guy. You are a free market monster. I've heard you've been called. You don't believe that we should license this. What do you think about what you're seeing here? And there is some cynical thoughts about what we just saw happen in terms of people in the lead wanting to maintain their lead by creating red tape. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, of course. I think, Sam just went straight for the end game here, which is regulatory capture. Normally, when a tech executive goes and testifies at these hearings, they're in the hot seat and they get grilled. And that didn't happen here because, Sam Altman basically bought into the narrative of these senators. And he basically conceded all of these risks associated with AI. He talked about how ChatGPT style models, if unregulated, could increase online misinformation, bolster cyber criminals, even threaten confidence in election systems. So he basically bought into the senator's narrative and, like you said, agreed to create a new agency that would license models and can take licenses away. He said that he would create safety standards, specific tests that a model has to pass before it can be deployed. He says he would require independent audits who can say the model is or isn't in compliance. And by basically buying into their narrative and agreeing to everything they want, which is to create all these new regulations and a new agency, I think that Sam is pretty much guaranteeing that he'll be one of the people who gets to help shape the new agency and the rules they're going to operate under and what these independent audits are how they're going to determine what's in compliance. So he is basically putting a big moat around his own incumbency here.
And
yes, it is a smart strategy for him. But the question is, do we really need any of this stuff? And, what you heard at the hearing is that just like with just about every other tech issue, the senators on the Judiciary Committee didn't exhibit any real understanding of the technology. And so they all generally talked about their own hobby horses. So, you heard from Senator Blackburn, she wants to protect songwriters. Hawley wants to stop anti-conservative bias. Klobuchar was touting a couple of bills that have her name on them. One's called the JCPA, Journalism Competition Preservation.
What does Bernie Sanders want to do? He wants to protect the 1% of the 1%?
Yeah, Durbin hates Section 230. That was the hobby horse he was riding. And then Senator Blumenthal was obsessed that someone had published deep fakes of himself. So, all of these different senators had different theories of harm that they were promoting. And they were all basically hammers looking for a nail. They all wanted to regulate this thing. And they didn't really pay much, if any, attention to the ways that existing laws could already be used to stop any of these things.
If you commit a crime with AI, there are plenty of criminal laws.
Every single thing they talked about could be handled through existing law if they amount to being harms at all.
Yeah.
But they want to jump right to creating a new agency and new regulations. And Sam, I think, did the expedient thing here, which is basically buy into it in order to be an insider.
If this was a chess game, Sam got to the mid game. He traded all the pieces and went right to the end game. Let's just try to checkmate here. I've got the lead. I got the $10 billion from Microsoft. Everybody else get a license and try to catch up. Friedberg, we have Chamath pro regulation licensing, I think, or just being pretty thoughtful about it there. You got Sachs being typically a free market monster. Let the laws be what they are, but these senators are going to do regulatory capture. Where do you, as the Sultan of Science, stand on this very important issue?
I think there's a more important kind of broader set of trends that are worth noting and that the folks doing these hearings and having these conversations are aware of, which implies why they might be saying the things that they're saying. That's not necessarily about regulatory capture. And that is that a lot of these models can be developed and generated to be much smaller. We're seeing, models that can effectively run on an iPhone. We're seeing a number of open source models that are being published now. There's a group called Mosaic ML. Last week, they published what looks like a pretty good quality model that has, a very large kind of token input, which means you can do a lot with it. And that model can be downloaded and used by anyone for free. Really good open source license that they've provided on that model. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg on what's going on, which is that these models are very quickly becoming ubiquitous, commoditized, small, and effectively are able to move to and be run on the edge of the network. As a result, that means that it's very hard to see who's using what models how behind the products and tools that they're building. And so if that's the trend, then it becomes very hard for a regulatory agency to go in and audit every server or every computer on a network and say, what model are you running? Is that an approved model? Is that not an approved model? It's almost like having a regulatory agency that has to go in and audit and assess whether a Linux upgrade or some sort of open source platform that's being run on some server is appropriately vetted and checked. And so it's almost like a fool's errand. And so if I'm running one of these companies and I'm trying to, get Congress off my butt and get all these regulators off my butt, I'm going to say, go ahead and regulate us. Because the truth is, there really isn't a great or easy path or ability to do that. And there certainly won't be in 5 or 10 years. Once these models all move on to the edge of the network and they're all being turned around all the time, every day, and there's a great evolution underway. So I actually take a point of view that it's not just that this is necessarily bad and there's cronyism going on. I think that the point of view is just that this is going to be a near impossible task to try and track and approve LLMs and audit servers that are running LLMs and audit apps and audit what's behind the tools that everyday people are using. And I wish everyone the best of luck in trying to do so. But that's kind of the joke of the whole thing. Is like, let's go ahead and pat all these Congress people on the shoulder and say, you got it, and you're right.
There you have it, folks. Wrong answer, Chamath and Sachs. Right answer, Friedberg. If you were to look at Hugging Face, if you don't know what that is, it's a basically an open source repository of all of the LLMs. The cat is out of the bag. The horses have left the barn. If you look at what I'm showing on the screen here, this is the Open LLM leaderboard. It's kind of buried on Hugging Face. If you haven't been to Hugging Face, this is where developers show their work, they share their work, and they kind of compete with each other in a social network showing all of their contributions. And what they do here is, and this is super fascinating, they have a series of tests that will take an LLM, a language model, and they will have it do science questions that would be for grade school. They'll do a test of mathematics, US history, computer science, etc.
There's a Jeopardy test too. I don't know if
Yes.
it's on here, but the Jeopardy test is really good. It's like straight up Jeopardy trivia and see if it can answer
Perfect.
the questions. Yeah.
Which actually, Friedberg was actually his high school Jeopardy championship 3 years in a row. But anyway, on this leaderboard, you can see the language models are outpacing what OpenAI did. I'm sorry, closed AI is what I call it now because they're closed source. Closed AI and Bard have admitted, that internal person at Bard said the language models here are now outpacing what they're able to do with much more resources. Many hands makes for light work. The open source models are going to fit on your phone or the latest, Apple silicon. So I think the cat's out of the bag. I don't know how they pull
There's
it back
nothing
in.
incompatible about that. What Friedberg just said with what I said. In fact, Friedberg's point bolsters my point. It's highly impractical to regulate open source software in this way. Also, when you look at that list of things that people are doing on Hugging Face, there's nothing nefarious about it.
Yeah.
And all the harms that were described are already illegal and can be prosecuted.
Exactly.
You don't need some special agency, giving it seal of approval. Again, this is going to replace permissionless innovation, which is what has defined the software industry and especially open source, with the need to develop some connection or relationship and lobbying in Washington to go get your project approved. And there's no really good reason for this except for the fact that the senators on the Judiciary Committee and all of Washington really wants more control so they can get more donations.
Sachs, I have a question. Do you think that creating the DMV and requiring a driver's license limits the ability for people to learn how to drive?
The DMV is like the classic example of how government doesn't work. I don't know why you'd want to make that your example. I mean, people have to
Well, that's
spend all
because
day
Chamath's
waiting
never
in
been to
line.
it. He sends people to it. He's got a VIP person.
You got to
who
spend
waits in
all
line.
day waiting in line to get your photo taken. It's insane. I mean,
That's not what I'm
everyone has
asking.
a miserable experience with it. No, but it's highly relevant because you're right. If you create an agency where people have to go get their permission, it's a licensing scheme. You're going to be waiting in some line of untold length. It won't be like a physical line at the DMV building. It's going to be a virtual line where you're in some queue where there's probably going to be some overworked regulator who doesn't even know how they're supposed to approve your project. They're just going to be trying to cover their ass because if the project ends up being something nefarious, then they get blamed for it. So that's what's going to end up happening.
Let me also highlight something that I think is maybe
I think the gun
a little
analogy
bit,
would be better.
a little bit
but go ahead.
misunderstood. But, an AI model is an algorithm. So it's a piece of software that takes data in and spits data out. And, we have algorithms that are written by humans. We have algorithms that have been, written by machines. These are machine learned models, which is what a lot of what people are calling AI today is effectively an extension of and out of. And so the idea that a particular algorithm is differentiated from another algorithm is also what makes this very difficult, because these are algorithms that are embedded and sit within products and applications that an end user and end customer ultimately uses. And I just sent you guys a link to the EU has been working towards passing this AI Act.
God, here we go.
They're a couple of weeks ahead of these conversations in the US. But I mean, as you read through this AI Act and the proposal that it's put forth, it almost becomes the kind of thing that you say, I just don't know if these folks really understand how the technology works, because it's almost as if they're going to audit and have, an assessment of the risk level of every software application out there. And that the tooling and the necessary infrastructure to be able to do that just makes no sense in the context of open source software, in the context of an open internet, in the context of how quickly software and applications and tools evolve, and you make tweaks to an algorithm and you got to resubmit it for authorization, reauthorization.
You can be sure their number one job, Friedberg, is going to be to protect jobs. So anything there that in any way infringes on somebody's ability to be employed in a position, whether it's an artist or a writer or a developer, they're going to say, you can't use these tools, or they're going to try to throttle them to try to protect jobs, because that's
Can
their
I ask
number
a question
one
then
job
of
over there.
all three of you?